Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the very important topic of gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work, which is taking place on the United Nations International Day of Eliminating Violence Against Women and Girls. And this International Day commemorates the assassination of the Mirabal sisters in 1960 in the Dominican Republic, who were women activists fighting dictatorship. And it is a day dedicated to raising awareness of the persistent violence against women and girls across the world and promoting action to prevent it, and also to acknowledge the pain of victims and survivors of such violence. My name is Kalina Arabagieva, and I'm a senior researcher here at the ETUI, and I have the real honor of opening today's event and chairing the first panel. But before I start with that, I would like to remind you that the event will be in English, but with interpretation in Italian, French, and German. So if you want to listen in these languages, there is also an icon in the bottom right of your Zoom window for interpretation which you can click on, and you can choose your language. So this was just a bit of housekeeping. Now a few words of introduction. So according to Convention 190 of the International Labour Organization, gender-based violence and harassment means violence and harassment which is directed at persons because of their sex or gender, or affecting persons of a particular sex or gender disproportionately. It includes sexual harassment. Now, of course, we know that the overwhelming majority of persons subject to such violence are women, but this definition is a bit broader and recognizes that others can be subject to such violence because of their gender identity as well. And the risk, we should acknowledge, is higher where gender intersects with other social vulnerabilities. So, for example, women with disabilities, women from racialized communities, trans women, migrant women, sex workers, among many other examples, are at a particularly high risk of violence and a high need for protection. And gender-based violence is a form of deeply embedded structural discrimination, and it constitutes a human rights violation that undermines the dignity and integrity of individuals, harming their feelings of self-worth and self-esteem and denying them the ability to enjoy their fundamental rights and freedoms. And I should note that last year, Eurostat, the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, and the European Gender Equality Institute published a study that found that 1 in 3 women in the EU have experienced physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, with 18% experiencing violence from an intimate partner. And we can assume that some of this is probably underreported. And another study by UN Women from 2023 estimates that each day between 6 and 7 women in Europe are killed by their partner or ex-partner, resulting in an estimated total of 2,300 women victims of femicides every year. And workplaces are not free of gender-based violence. On the contrary, in fact, many instances of such violence occur in the course of work, whether by managers, supervisors, co-workers, or third parties like customers or patients, on the way to work, or they have effects that spill over into the workplace. So for instance, the physical and economic effects on women victims of domestic violence. So for example, the Eurostat survey I mentioned showed that 30% of women in the EU have experienced sexual harassment at work at least once, with that percentage going up to 40% among women between 14 and 29. And a recent survey, which was conducted by the European Transport Workers Federation in the transport sector, revealed some really shocking figures. And actually, Manuela Kropp from the ETF was going to present this to us today, but she was not able to join us. So I still want to mention some of the findings. Now, the survey was gathered responses from over 1,000 women across multiple transport sectors, and it found that 74% of women in those sectors reported having experienced violence or harassment in their current workplace. So out of those, 7% experience it daily, 17% several times a week, 7% once a week, and 45% several times a week. And third-party violence from passengers and service users was the most common at 56%, but 41% of incidents involve colleagues, managers, or supervisors. And the types of abuse included not only verbal harassment, threats and intimidation, but also sexual harassment, spitting, cyber violence, and so on. So this is the very harsh reality of women workers across some sectors in particular. So we mentioned transport, but also the sector that is on strike today in Belgium, which is public services. But of course, it has huge effects on women across all sectors. So gender-based violence and harassment, including in the world of work, is still an enormous and widespread issue with extremely serious consequences, and it needs to be addressed urgently. And as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, it is also an issue that tends to be exacerbated even further in times of crisis, whether that's a health crisis, the climate crisis, economic crisis, war, armed conflict, or displacement. So this afternoon, we'll take the opportunity to reflect on some of what has been done at the EU level to address it and what more can be done in two different panels. So in the first panel, we will hear from experts on what has and needs to be done at the EU and national levels on this, both in terms of a general legal framework, but also action on the particular topics of domestic violence and also education and awareness raising. And then in the second panel, we will hear from policymakers on the future trajectory of EU policy on gender-based violence and harassment. And here, many of you may have noticed, I want to stress that even though all of our speakers today are women, I want to point out this is not because it's a women's issue, on the contrary, but it's because the majority of people working on this topic are women, which is probably something that we need to reflect on as well. So with that, I want to turn to the fantastic speakers in our first panel, and I would like to introduce first Ceren Kasim, who is a postdoctoral research and teaching fellow at the University of Hildesheim in Germany, and who works on a wide range of legal topics, including international law and human rights, labor law, and anti-discrimination law, and who has also written on the topic of gender-based violence and domestic violence. Ceren is actually the author of a recent ETUI working paper on addressing work-related gender-based violence and harassment, insights from the EU directive on this topic, and she'll present her findings of the paper on how this directive applies to the world of work, but also some of the gaps it leaves in this respect. Then our second speaker will be Jane Pillinger, who is an independent expert working on gender equality at work, especially on the topic of gender-based violence and harassment, but also equal pay. Jane is an expert advisor for a number of international organizations, including the ILO and UN Women, and has previously held academic positions across several universities in the UK and also other organizations. She has worked with this topic on this topic with trade unions for many years, and she's really the expert on addressing gender-based violence at work. So today she'll tell us about why domestic violence is also a workplace issue. And the third speaker will be my dear colleague, Paula Mejia Gonzalez, who is an education officer here at the ETUI, responsible for providing training for trade unionists. And she is an experienced trainer, but she's also a women's rights activist, and she currently leads the ETUI's trainings on gender equality, including the Women's Leadership Program, trainings on gender violence and harassment at work, on intersectionality, and also on the ETUI equality awareness and self-monitoring tool. So she will talk to us about the crucial importance of education and awareness raising. And as I mentioned, Manuela from ETF was also meant to join us, but she wasn't able to come. So I really want to thank Paula for joining us on such short notice. So a warm welcome to the three of you. You will have about 12 minutes each for the presentations, after which we will open the floor so that our audience has an opportunity to ask you their questions. So with that, I would like to first pass the floor to Ceren.
Thank you, Polina. Thank you for the generous introduction. I actually lost my voice today, but I thought that it would not allow us to lost our voice, so I came here right away. So thank you. It's an honor for me to share the floor with this digital floor with Paula and Jane, and many thanks to ETUI for organizing this important event on such a significant day. So today I have the privilege to presenting the main findings of the ETUI working paper on the new EU directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence, which I will refer to as the anti-violence directive. My aim is today to give you a brief overview how the directive can help to address gender-based violence at work, And I will structure my remarks in three main parts. First, I will present the directive's explicit provisions addressing GBVH in the world of work. Second, I will explore its implicit applications, opportunities for broader interpretation to support workplace action. And finally, I will examine the major gaps in the directive with a focus on missing links to the world of work and worker representation. So let me begin by outlining the explicit ways in which the Anti-Wife Directive addresses gender-based violence in the employment context. The directive adopts actually a comprehensive framework and aimed at effectively preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. It commits to the coordinated measures spanning from prevention, victim protection, victim support. These are the terminology of the directive, access to justice, and multi-agency cooperation. These are complemented with new criminal offenses, which is very interesting for us, and enhanced mechanisms for regular data collection. Importantly, the directive understands itself as a key tool for implementing the Istanbul Convention within the EU. And however, as actually reflected its dual legal basis, it has to be Articles 82.2 and 83.1 of the TFU. It mainly provides for minimum rules on criminal offenses and on victims' rights, rather than targeting workplace-specific violence. Nevertheless, there are some provisions explicitly addressing sexual harassment and GBVH at work, and I would like to address them first. To begin with, Article 28, supported by Recital 65, the directive requires both victims and employers have access to specialist counseling services. These include support in responding to incidents and, where necessary, provide information on remedies, such as the possibility of removing offenders from the workplace. Additional provisions can be found in Articles 34 and 36, address early intervention and training. However, it is important to acknowledge that the application of these measures remain only limited for those countries where workplace sexual harassment has been criminalized in national law. So this leads at a crucial observation. At present, only 15 member states, EU member states, have criminalized workplace sexual harassment. As a result, the directive's direct impact is uneven across the EU. Second topic, turning on to online environment, the directive represents significant progress by criminalizing for the first time in the EU level specific forms of cyber violence. And in this context, the directive criminalizes cyber harassment. And according to Recital 24, it emphasizes that cyber harassment can occur particularly in work settings. Another relevant dimension is the role of the social partners, such as trade unions and employer associations, anyway. And the directive actually encourages cooperation with social partners in prevention, early intervention, and training efforts, as well as design and implementation of targeted awareness-raising campaigns. Although these forms of collaboration are encouraged, as it is only encouraged, they are not strictly required by the directive, actually. The last topic, in addition, the directive places emphasis on making accessible specialized support services available for the survivors. These services specifically include work-related dimensions, such as assistance in maintaining or finding employment, financial support, and broader socioeconomic integration, following incidents and exploitation or harassment. In summary, the directive explicitly addresses sexual and cyber harassment and signals the value of collaboration with social partners and regulates victim support services with work-related support. Moving beyond the explicit provisions, I would like to highlight there are several elements within the directive which could reinforce efforts to address GBVH at work. To begin with, economic violence. The directive recognizes gender-based violence that leads to economic or do so. And this recognition, it means in the practice that could extend to the workplace-related scenarios. For example, seizing an employee's earnings, preventing someone from generating income, such as forcing them to work without pay in a family business, or incapacitating them from working through targeted physical abuse, those kind of things. But also individuals from particular jobs or paid or equally paid work. This could also be understood as violence. And could have an impact on the workplace or settings. Non-consensual sharing of intimate material is also a topic. As I said, the directive criminalizes new forms of cyber violence, and this is one of them. And it is highlighted by the Grevio that these acts, now criminalized by the directive, can have direct and damaging effects on individuals' working life. And I insist that we could also understand this non-consensual sharing of the intimate material also in the work context. This is also an issue for cyber incitement. Another issue, furthermore, the director acknowledges aggravating circumstances for crimes against human rights defenders. And as we think that trade unions and worker representatives are also human rights defenders and heightened risk of in connection with their advocacy, the member states should also take this into consideration. As well as there are training mechanisms which can be transposed into national law. The directive mentions only training for police and legal professionals, but I argue that occupational health and safety representatives, as well as labor inspectors, could also use these training mechanisms. And lastly, the directive encourages member states to collaborate with women's organizations and specialist services, and importantly that trade unions positioning them, women committees at the trade unions should also be understood in this context. Taken together, these elements, if interpreted ambitiously and implemented with determination, have the potential to substantially reinforce and respond to GBVH across all areas of working life. However, despite the strengths and opportunities, the anti-WIPE directive features several critical gaps. Perhaps the main shortcoming is the directive's lack of a dedicated chapter or set of articles on the world of work. This also includes third-party violence and harassment. Another topic, which Jane will refer later, important areas to concern is the relationship between the domestic violence and work. The directive recognizes domestic violence, but does not make this connection between domestic violence and work. Another issue is occupational health and health issue. Actually, originally, the proposal included a specific requirement for workplace risk assessments relating to gender-based violence and harassment. However, this crucial provision does not appear in the final directive. So this is, I think, it's one of the weakest points of the directive. Also, we have to mention that when it comes to role of the collective actors, especially trade unions, the directive's provisions are sufficiently robust, and the directive does not go far enough in advancing social dialogue. Taking together these gaps highlights the need for further action if we are to ensure that efforts to prevent and respond to GBVH and extend meaningfully into the world of work. In conclusion, the Anti-Wow Directive represents a landmark step in the EU's commitment to advancing gender equality and ending violence against women and domestic violence. Its recognition of workplace forms of GBVH like sexual harassment and cyber harassment is to welcome. However, the failing of addressing the world of work in a robust and holistic manner, and by omitting the proactive roles of the trade unions and occupational health and safety representative, the directive risks leaving a significant gap in women's protection in employment settings. For this reason, the working paper calls for an ambitious and progressive national transposition. And it is important that the EU and its member states re-evaluate all current equality, anti-discrimination, and occupational health and safety regulations with an understanding of gender-based violence and harassment. So in the long term, it is recommended that the member states follow the invitation of the Council and ratify Convention 190, or hopefully that the EU enacts its own directive in this area. I think only by doing so will the EU fully deliver its promise, ensuring that all workers, despite their gender, can participate in the world of work safely, equally, and with dignity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chelin. That was a really, really clear explanation, very thorough analysis of the directive, and also a very clear recommendation and message for the future. So thank you very much. And I really encourage everyone to also read the paper by Chelin in more detail. Before we move to the next speaker, I just have a maybe small message for, I think, the interpretation in German. There was just a comment in the chat that there was some problem with the sound. So perhaps, I mean, I could hear it, but maybe there was a little bit of breaking up of the sound. So maybe this is just a message for the interpreters. Okay, so thank you. So I would love to move on to the next speaker now. Jane, the floor is yours.
Thanks. I think, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Great. Thanks so much, Sharon. That was and congratulations on your paper for the ETUI. It's a really excellent paper. Really encourage everybody to read it. And thanks for your really excellent presentation. I'm going to be talking specifically about domestic violence as a workplace issue. But I just want to kind of set a bit of a context here, because I think since COVID, what we've seen is some kind of worrying trends in rising levels of sexism, misogyny, gender-based violence and harassment, all of which have become more normalized. You know, we've seen much more misogyny resurginating in public debates, in politics, in online spaces. And, you know, often this has been fueled by well-organized networks that frame feminism, activism, equality as threats to culture and tradition and so on. So, and we've seen from, you know, all of the surveys that have been carried out recently by governments, by EU agencies, by trade unions, worrying and escalating levels of gender-based violence and harassment at work. And I think we've also got better recognition now of the current worrying levels of the kind of multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination faced by some groups that make women much more vulnerable to instances of gender-based violence at work. So, you know, a very interesting survey from the UK found that, you know, double the number of Black women compared to other groups of women were experiencing sexual harassment at work. And I think this kind of intersection of, you know, racism and sexism faced by racialized women is a particularly worrying in terms of rising levels. I'm going to turn particularly to the issue of domestic violence as a workplace issue. I've got some slides actually. I'm just going to put them up if that would help. Here they are. Can you see my screen okay? I can put that on full screen if I can do that. Sorry about this. I should have got this. Can you see those okay? Great.
Yes.
Fantastic. So obviously, Karina and Sherin have talked about the importance of Convention 190. One of the great breakthroughs in the convention was when the workers group, thanks to the workers group for pushing this issue, got the recognition of domestic violence as a workplace issue into the convention. It was a huge breakthrough, I have to say. I suppose one of the most biggest disappointments of the directive on violence against women is its complete lack of acknowledgement that domestic violence impacts the workplace. And I think for many of us, that was a really big disappointment, given that there's a strong focus on multifaceted approaches to preventing domestic violence. So why because people often say, when I talk about domestic violence, they often say, well, why is it, a workplace issue? Why is it a trade union issue even? Isn't it something private that happens in the home? Well, first of all, we have to recognize that domestic violence, just to define it, includes kind of interlinked forms of power and control in current or former intimate partner relationships, that can then follow them into the workplace. And we have to recognize that, it's not just about physical violence, it's psychological, emotional threats, sexual abuse, financial abuse, stalking, coercive control in particular. And I think when we look at issues such as financial abuse, studies show that 90% of victims of domestic violence experience financial abuse as well. It's a really important workplace issue. And one of the biggest indicators of women being able to get out of abusive relationships is having an independent income. So it's really, really important that we kind of support domestic violence support in the workplace, recognize domestic violence as an occupational safety and health issue that impacts at work. It's also an issue about safety because we know that physical assaults, in some cases, really awful assaults on women and femicide take place in the workplace because it's the only place where a former partner can find that an abuser can find the person that they have victimized. It also happens in traveling to and from work. It also is an issue in relation to harassment at work, where former partners control their victims through email, telephone, and other forms of social media. It impacts on women's health and well-being and their productivity and their capacity to keep working. In fact, we know that survivors of domestic violence are more likely to leave their jobs, to work part-time, to not progress in their careers, and generally to experience lower earnings. So these are some of the research evidence that we have on domestic violence and abuse. Leading to higher sick levels, absenteeism, being forced to leave work, reduced work performance, difficulties in concentration, isolation from colleagues, difficulties to access work because of coercive control. I mean, I interviewed a woman one time who said that, I just couldn't get to work because he stole my car keys and then he stole my purse. Another woman said I couldn't get to work because he hid my bus pass. All of these issues really, really important. It includes stalking by abusers in the workplace, particularly car parks are particularly dangerous places. And we've seen some femicides taking place in workplace car parks because you can identify the car, often at night. And as I mentioned, career development and pay inequalities are this, link between pay equity, equal pay for work of equal value, and gender-based violence and harassment are integrally connected. So we know that those are some of the effects. We also know that we have a legal framework, and I just want to set this in a kind of occupational safety framework because the framework directive on safety and health of workers at work really does put in place the duty of an employer to protect the health and safety of workers. So we can translate that into also including domestic violence, although few employers actually recognise that as being part of their duty. I'd already mentioned Convention 190 and Recommendation 206. But some governments across the world have introduced national laws that provide rights for victims and survivors of domestic violence, covering things like, workplace supports, paid leave, protection, safety planning, flexible working, and so on. And some of the best provisions can be found in Canada, Australia, recently introduced in Ireland. And, shout out to our sisters in Italy and Spain who have been absolutely brilliant in negotiating collective agreements that extend the rights that exist within the law. I would say that those countries that have a legal framework, it makes it much easier then to negotiate policies with workers, and is a good example of how embedding these rights in the law, which is why it's such a missed opportunity not to have this in the Domestic Violence Work Directive, means that it further impacts on whether employers really feel that they have an obligation to do this. So a few examples of some of the jointly agreed policies and collective agreements. These are some really interesting examples from the technology sector in France, Orange, La Poste, Crédit Agricole in the banking sector, and public sector agreements, all now cover provisions on domestic violence as a workplace issue, including flexibility at work, paid leave, and also the right to change your job. In Ireland, there's been some very recently introduced the law, so it's been easier to introduce these collective agreements, also tending to kind of focus on paid leave and flexibility at work and protection and security planning. In Italy, Vodafone, public sector agreements, education, health, central government, and so on, all have tried to, as far as possible, extend the provision of 3 months paid leave in the law, and ensuring that workers have the right to some flexibility in their work and protection. And I think in Spain, there's been some really, really good agreements. There's one exceptional agreement in the finance and insurance sector. And some agreements have, in fact, gone for indefinite leave and provided the right to have the right to change your job location if you're in a company that has locations in other parts of the country, to change your job tasks and have temporary reduction in your job roles. And in the UK, mainly these have been in the public sector in health and local government. So these are some examples. I want to say a few words about paid leave, because paid leave, although actually we say it really doesn't matter how much paid leave you have, because actually it's something that gets individually negotiated. One of the things that I've found in the agreements is that paid leave sends a very strong message to survivors of domestic violence that they have the right to some support. So we've seen the agreements in France have tended to focus on 3 to 5 days, or between 3 and 5 days paid domestic violence leave. This is in addition to other leave programs. In Ireland, they've stuck to policies that provide to 10 days paid leave. In the UK, it's tended to be 10 days established in the Vodafone Global Policy, which set the best benchmark of 10 days across the world, kind of largely based on the New Zealand legal provisions. But there's been varying levels of leave in different local authorities and hospital trusts. And as I mentioned, in Italy, you've got up to 3 months paid leave provided for under the law, which has been implemented across many sectors and in some cases doubling that leave. And then in Spain, lots of different types of paid and unpaid leave provided for in company equality plans, including, in some cases, indefinite leave. Some of these policies have also addressed the issues of financial abuse, and there's some really good collective agreements in Spain that deal with things like providing emergency payments for women in the case of financial abuse, or giving salary advances and so on. Keeping women in work is absolutely crucial to this. In relation to some recent European social partner agreements, domestic violence has been creeping into these agreements, which is really encouraging. So the framework agreement on digitalisation in central government includes the recognition of domestic violence as a workplace issue, the updated EU social partner guidelines on multisectoral guidelines on third-party violence and harassment, also recognise domestic violence as a form of third-party violence and harassment, but also recognise the uniqueness of it as a form of gender-based violence and harassment. And also these multisectoral guidelines were agreed earlier this year, and I would encourage you to have a look at the website thirdpartyviolence.org, which has been developed to try and disseminate the guidelines and the research that we carried out on third-party violence and harassment. Uni Europa also developed an initiative with private sector service companies in commerce, finance, gaming, private care, telecommunications, which also include domestic violence as a workplace issue. So these are encouraging developments to see them coming into some of the recent European social partner agreements. These are just a few of the examples of these. I want to say a couple of words very briefly, because I'm going to be running out of time in a moment, about risk prevention and other safety measures. I mean, obviously, one of the issues is that if domestic violence comes into the workplace, it's really important that we carry out risk assessment. What is the risk? Individualized, targeted risk assessments are absolutely crucial. And they also are important in ensuring that there are targeted safety plans drawn up with the women themselves. It's really important that they're built into occupational health and employee assistance programs, that there's financial and housing support, particularly if somebody needs to urgently get out of a violent situation, that there are workplace advocates, persons of trust in the workplace who can give advice and support in a confidential manner. And that could be trade union representatives as well. And we found that trade union representatives who have been trained on these issues are really often a first-line contact for a woman. Incidentally, the research finds that women who want to disclose abuse usually disclose it to somebody that they trust. Often it's a co-worker or a trade union representative, not to a manager or a supervisor. That comes later. Okay, there's also issues around partnerships with domestic violence organisations and referring survivors onto specialist support with domestic violence organisations. So recommendations that can be adapted for small and large organisations of what to include in the policy. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but obviously a policy on domestic violence as a workplace issue is really crucial to stress confidentiality, non-retaliation, having clear roles for managers and supervisors, and confidential information for workers, including protocols and safety measures for workers in customer-facing services, office-based locations, teleworking, hybrid working, and so on. Paid leave and flexible working time. That might be, while you're suffering the effects of the abuse or recovering from abuse. It could be, settling children into new homes and schools. And that might require some temporary adjustment of work tasks, flexible working, and paid leave, and so on. Further information, I thought I'd put up some references that might be useful for you if you want to read up on these issues. But I think just finally to say about domestic violence as a workplace issue, we are seeing much more recognition of it as being a health and safety risk, and that's really good news. We want to make sure it gets into collective bargaining so that when gender-based violence and harassment is referred to, it includes domestic violence. It's not just about sexual harassment, it's also sexual harassment, domestic violence, stalking, and other sex-based crimes in the workplace. And make sure that in the future we keep advocating for a new directive on violence and harassment that gives a strong focus on gender-based violence and harassment. So thanks very much to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jane. That was, again, that was really clearly, really thorough, and also really, really inspiring to see that all of this work is being done and the things that you're working on. Yeah, I think that was, I think that explained very clearly why domestic violence is very much a workplace issue for all of these different reasons, that there are already some really good examples of legal frameworks across the world that offer protection and recognition to domestic violence as a workplace issue, good examples of collective agreements. And I think here we should remember that collective bargaining is a really important tool to address gender-based violence and harassment in workplaces in general, as well as gender equality issues in general, and also how we can harness occupational health and safety prevention measures. So thank you very, very much. And so now I will pass to the third speaker of the day, my colleague Paula.
Thank you very much, Kalina, and thank you very much, Jane, for the presentation. Also, thanks to Cheren Kasim. It's an honor and a pleasure to share the panel with you ladies. So thank you very much. My presentation today will be about gender-based violence and harassment through trade union education. So we have been talking about the legal framework, also some applications that we see in the collective bargaining agreements, and really, really effective policies for the workplaces to prevent these situations. And then I would like to address how to translate that into the face-to-face communication with the trade union representatives, with workers, and to tell you more about what we do at the education department. So I will share my screen. Just let me know if you can see my presentation. Wait a second.
Yes, so we can see the screen. Perfect.
Okay, so you can see my presentation. Perfect. So, the idea is to mention what we do, for example, in the ETUI education department and the methodologies we use to approach the topic, to talk about the topic, because the topic is not an easy topic. Sometimes you find people that are really convinced to work on it, and sometimes you find some resistances. So also to talk about this, then to discuss a little bit about the gender transformative approach, which is an approach that we are using, a framework we are using in the education department to move from just creating awareness to really transform the workplaces and transform and make change possible in the workplaces and in the trade union organizations. And a couple of examples of methodologies for action and change in order to keep the line with the gender transformative approach. So just to begin with this small introduction about the ETUI education and trade union education approach. Well, we are convinced that education play a crucial role in strengthening the trade union movement, in creating collective awareness on specific topics, and in promoting labor rights. So it's a great tool to create strong, independent, democratic, representative organizations. Like, let's make use of it, and let's use it also to create response to the challenges that we face in our daily basis. So when we talk about the topic, when we talk about the gender-based violence and harassment in the workplaces, we need more than just information about the topic. We will need to act, and for that we will need a specific methodology. So we try to put together like all the information we have, all the expertise of amazing researchers, experts on the topic, with active methodologies. So where the trade unionists, the trade union representatives, and the workers are main actors in the reflection. So it's not just receiving the information. Now we know about this. We kind of dig really, really deeper on the topic, but also to provide information on how to act, and also to put in practice, to have like a kind of a lab, or like a kind of safe space to see how to deal with those situations. So if we are talking about gender-based violence and harassment, and we know that we, in our organization, we are using protocols to tackle these situations. Let's work on the protocols. Let's put ourselves in the situation of an expert. If in the legal framework of our country we have the main role to be also negotiating these protocols, so let's rehearse to do it in a proper way, and have the chance to make mistakes in those safe spaces, to be the best negotiators when we have to go to the table, or when we have to work together with the employers. So when we mention the topic, so we are going to work on eliminating gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace. We can connect that with other topics. For example, Jane was mentioning before, you can connect that with health and safety, issues in the workplace. You can connect that with fundamental rights. The most important thing here is that we need to understand that this is not an individual problem. It's not something that is happening just to one person in our workplace, but it's going beyond that, and it's a systemic problem. So we need to address that, and we need to put together enough information to create the awareness of this systemic issue. In very different researchers, we have seen that, pieces of research, we have seen that creating awareness is very important, but mostly, like, all these trainings on just creating awareness are fantastic, but after 6 months or after 3 months, you have the awareness, but then you need to get concrete tools. You need to get concrete, I don't know, practices, good practices, inspirational campaigns or things like this that connect that topic with your reality, and that helps you to figure out how in your organization you are going to organize workers to work on eliminating gender-based violence, or to coordinate a group of people that will create the awareness and that will show specific tools. So we need more. We need more than just the knowledge, the policies, but also to know the tools and how to apply those tools. An effective response in terms of eliminating gender-based violence and harassment is to have all the colleagues and like the participants in the room equipped to prevent the actions. So to recognize what are the actions that are related to that concept, gender-based violence and sexual harassment. Understand the concept, know what are the conducts that involve that issue, then to move after, like, identifying those warning signs and to have the prevention tools, go for the intervention tools. So what is the appropriate intervention? If I am a trade union representative, what is my role? What are the boundaries? Where can I find some more support from other, let's say, guidelines, or perhaps in the company there's specific spaces. And then also the third element we would like to incorporate in order to align with this gender transformative approach is to create also the structural change in the organizations and in society, if possible. Let's dream. So trade unions including the topic in their agendas as a priority, and having the leadership, the support from their leadership to put all the efforts to combating gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace. As it was mentioned before by Jen, but also by Teren, we need to recognize that we live in an intersectional reality. So we need to identify who are the people that will be affected by this big issue. In this case, we have women, yes, in general. We have, a society that has plenty of gender stereotypes, like also that has this binary concepts in it. But then we have to look at the different layers of discrimination, of privilege, and of power. And we have to understand that migrant women could be more exposed to discriminations and will be more likely to be victims of gender-based violence or sexual harassment, depending on the situations that they live, or LGBTQI plus workers, or workers in precarious situations, or racialized workers, as Jane mentioned before. So we would like to mention all those situations in the training courses, to be prepared for the different cases that we will need to face. Then in terms of the pedagogical approach, we like to use this gender transformative approach because it provides this theoretical framework that help us to address the roots of the problem, to address the symptoms, but then also to go beyond that and work on the actions that we would like to implement. So the approach helps us to name the issues, to create those categories, and to change and to challenge the social constructed norms. Prioritizing the education to create awareness, to learn more about preventive tools, to put in practice the competencies, the skills. I mean, it takes time. I know it's also an investment of money, of resources, financial and human resources, but you need to dedicate that time in order to create a better workplace, a better organization, and to keep like sustainable changes in the workplaces. Well, here you have some examples of why these transformational approaches are so important and so interesting to work with, because you can have you can see at the issue from very different perspectives, and I think one that is very connected to the trade union movement and that help us to improve working conditions and move forward and create safer spaces for women are, for example, this connection with the collective. I mean, this is not individual, this is collective, should be solved in a collective way. We all have a role on how can we change and transform the culture in our organizations and workplaces. So, or being active bystanders, champions, allies, or being workers' representatives entitled to specific responsibilities. Also in the institutional or the policy fields. Some of the methodologies that could be interesting to explore, and that in some of our courses we have worked on that. This methodology for action and change is the bystander intervention. It is a set of 5 actions that everyone can use to de-escalate situation, a potential situation of the sexual harassment. So if you see something in your workplace, you cannot be just a witness of the situation, but you have to act in a way. And how to do that? Well, one action could be the distraction, delegation, documentation of what is going on. Also, delay and then directly ask the person who has been affected by the situation if they are okay, that you understand that that situation is unacceptable. So train also participants in workshops on how to use this 5Ds for bystander intervention is something that helps and that gives you also, it gives you your role, but also gives you a purpose, in the case you watch and you witness different situations. Another methodology for action and for change is, the one that I mentioned at the beginning, co-creating prevention protocols. If we are using the tool for prevention of protocols to tackle or to eliminate gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace, then let's follow the steps. Let's see what happens. Why this is helpful, because it creates the awareness of having a culture of prevention, raise awareness in the impact of sexual harassment on workers' health, in their physical and mental health. And it also talks about institutional and structural sexism, and help participants to understand complex concepts and to create very specific actions that are concrete and transform all that abstraction into concrete steps and actions. Here I have an example of a good practice is done by, this one is like a sexual harassment observatory that is run by Comisiones Obreras in Spain. They have their like a big set of tools of like the legal framework if you are in the country, but if you are not Spanish, or if you are interested in knowing more about this, they also have like plenty of resources, like training resources, inspiration for campaigns, etc. And another one is, just always to think about that gender-based violence is a trade union topic. It's not something that is for the private sphere, but is something that we should address also in the workplaces and in the trade union organizations. So one good practice or good example would be like all this advocacy for the ILO Convention 190, and how to explain that to a group of people in assemblies, also doing some workshops, and committing to advocate for this, and also to understand that this should be also part of our trade union agenda. Okay, here are some resources that I found that could be like interested in order to create awareness. Like, I don't know, if someone is telling you, well, I cannot understand this. Well, this is this fantastic iceberg in different languages, but you also have elements that can help trade union representatives to identify safe and healthy workplaces, or really dangerous and toxic workplaces, depending on what's going on. With the idea of the violentometer, I'm sorry because it's a difficult word to pronounce. I think the original idea came from Mexico, and then there are like lots of trade unions using this tool. Make use of it. It is fantastic. Of course, you can dig deeper, but you can also use this as an educator in your workshops. Okay, and finally, well, I just wanted to tell you that don't leave this topic out of your of your priorities, because sometimes we think, well, it's really important to train people on, I don't know, let's yeah, collective bargaining, or yeah, conflict resolution, depending on the responsibilities you have. But keep this as one of the basic things that you should work on every time you think about eliminating gender-based violence and harassment, and you think on having a better and safer workplaces for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this, Paula. Again, sorry. Do you just hear me in English?
No.
Yeah. Sorry, I just heard an overtone of German interpretation, but that's fine. Sorry. Anyway, thank you, Paula, for the presentation. Again, very clear points, very, very clear message. You mentioned so many important things. This is a systemic issue which requires a collective response. Just giving information and the facts and the legal frameworks is not enough. People also have to understand what it means and how to apply it and be confident in applying it, including to understand the signs, including early warning signs, which I still think many people do not adequately react to, such as, well, this was just a joke, it's not a big deal. It's an early warning sign. But then also to know exactly how to respond and have a sort of proper method and response in place. So thank you very, very much. So I think we've got about 20 minutes for some questions for you, and there've been already some questions in the chat. So I'll read out some of them. So I think the first one asked a while ago, this is for I think it's for the panelists in general, unless there are specific ones. So the first one is whether there are any special consideration when it comes to sexual violence in the workplace and sexual harassment in the workplace when it comes to occupational risk prevention. Then there is a question which is specific for Paula on what she just talked about, which is what is meant by delegate in this bystander context or in this framework for responses. And then another one, I think it's more of a comment, is so Eskild Hustfeld, I'm sorry to mispronounce your name, says, within parts of the healthcare sector, there is a kind of culture of silent acceptance of sexualized harassment from patients. That this comes with the territory in a way. Silent acceptance also hides it from view. It happens behind closed doors and it might not be talked about. So the question is, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on how we can fight the notion that accepting harassment from patients is required to be a good nurse. Thank you so much for this question and also the comment in general. I think it really strikes at the heart of some of what we're talking about. And I actually had another question on my end, which is really what are the, I think many of you touched on them, but really what are the main obstacles that victims of gender-based violence at work face when they want to report an incident or expect to get some kind of reaction from their employer? So I think this kind of is maybe linked a little bit to the question we just had. So, and what can be done to overcome them? So I'll leave it here, but I also welcome any more questions in the chat. We might have time for them. Who wants to go first? Jane, go on. Sorry, Jane, I think you're still muted. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great questions, everybody. The question about sexual violence and sexual harassment in occupational safety and risk assessment. and prevention is a really important question. And in my mind, it's the most important development in our work on gender-based violence and harassment, because most of the work that's been carried out by unions and employers across Europe has really been about establishing effective complaints mechanisms that workers trust. We still haven't achieved that, but ILO Convention 190 was really helpful in opening the door to employers' responsibilities to include prevention of gender-based violence and harassment in risk assessment. And I think it's a hugely important development. And I'll just give you one example of something I'm involved in. I'm sure there may be other examples, but I've been working with 2 global unions and Unilever, the multinational company Unilever, who have a joint commitment on preventing sexual harassment at work. It's part of, kind of the joint commitments, global framework agreements that are made with global unions and multinational companies. And they are now translating that into a risk prevention framework and a toolkit on how to prevent gender-based violence and harassment and integrate it into occupational safety and health. So we've been working on this for 2 years, and we had the first pilot project that's been launched in the UK. But effectively, it sets out a kind of 6-step framework for carrying out the integration of gender-based violence and harassment into risk assessment procedures with practical guidance. So I think it's a really important area. Some unions have developed checklists on kind of, for safety committees. I know in Italy, there's been better connection between the kind of safety and gender equality functions within trade unions and bringing that into the new obligations. In the Netherlands, in Sweden, Belgium, and Denmark, where psychosocial risks are now recognized as being connected to discrimination and gender-based violence and harassment. There's now really some interesting developments happening about how you can build prevention of gender-based violence and harassment into psychosocial risk assessment as well. So I think these are hugely important areas. On the question of delegation and bystander approaches, I'll leave that to Paula, because that was part of your presentation. But just to say, I think building trade unions as allies and men as allies and active bystander approaches are really, really important. And there's been some really successful examples on that in Canada in particular. The question about the health services is really, really crucial question. I don't know which country you were from, but this acceptance about silence, that we don't report cases of aggression or violence or threats or harassment from patients or their families. And it maintains a kind of culture of silence and non-reporting is a really important issue that you raise. I think the new multi-sectoral guidelines on third-party violence and harassment might be quite helpful for you in that regard, because they do address these issues within a context of gender-based violence and harassment, and particularly how to address and prevent gender-based third-party violence and harassment, which we know is really high in the health sector, in transport, in education, in retail, in hospitality, and in restaurants and so on, where there's contact with clients. But I think in the health sector, it's something different as well, because often nurses are working with people, or health workers are working with people with very complex mental health and physical health problems, where there's high levels of stress, and it's a really difficult issue. So I think those are really crucial issues. And then finally, just your question, Kalina, about obstacles in reporting. I mean, while we still have cultures of victim blaming and impunity, it's going to be very difficult to continue to encourage women to report, because we've got the most fantastic policies, legal frameworks in Europe, and yet women still don't report sexual harassment. So we have to ask the question, why are they not reporting sexual harassment? Is it because the complaints procedures are inaccessible? Is it because they don't trust the complaints mechanisms? Is it that they know that their complaints won't be listened to? So developing better trusted systems of reporting on gender-based violence and harassment is going to be absolutely crucial in the future. I can say more on any of these topics if you want me to elaborate on them, but those are just my initial observations and questions. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Jane. That's really fantastic. Paula, do you want to?
Yes, I would like to reply to the question of the 5Ds. So yeah, distract is for interrupt the situation. So for example, try to find like seem that it look like you are lost and you need some help and interrupt the situation. Delegate is to, for example, if you are not the person in charge of following a procedure, a complaint procedure or something like this, if you are just witnessing the situation. So get someone with authority involved in the situation. And then document is to record what happened and record some evidence. Delayed is for a check afterwards if the person is okay. And direct is for to mention that and to make to make clear that that situation is unacceptable. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Paula. I don't know if you want to address any of the other questions as well. If not, I'm happy to move on to Cherin.
No, please go ahead with Cherin, I think.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the questions. Very interesting. First of all, about the question about the sexual violence and sexual harassment, I think it's important to understand that sexual harassment came in the 1970s as reflecting to the experiences of the women in the workplace. But in the end, violence is a very broad term, and it also has all the kinds of violence and harassments which we understand in it: economical violence, sexual harassment, domestic violence, and all of them, and also the ones which we cannot understand, not now maybe, but 10 years we will think that it's also a kind of new violence. So I think it was important for the Convention 190 that they chose to use a combined terminology, violence and harassment, so that we do not have to think about it. Is it a violence? Is it harassment? What we are talking about? Of course, we have to understand and powerfully carry our history about the sexual harassment. What I mean is that it took very long time to make the people accept that sexual harassment is a form of violence in the workplace. But also we are now in a position where we understand both of them in a very broad aspect. And I think it's also liberating that we have now a broader terminology about the obstacles, and I really don't know what are the obstacles, but I can combine it with the question that I see in now about the Germany. The question, Elisabeth Dürimic, I could pronounce it rightly. She elaborates that now in Germany, even though there are complaint officers, there are not enough complaints. But I want to also express, before the AGG, German Equal Treatment Act, there was a provision in the civil law of the Germany, and it was in force for about 20 years. And during this period, there was only about, I don't want to give any wrong numbers, but about 120 cases about this provision in 20 years. But since 26, there is an Equal Treatment Act in Germany, which is very broad and has a very great implication. Now there are too many numbers, compared to what it was before. So I think we are going in a better way, an understanding of what sexual harassment is and gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace. And we feel ourselves empowered by the new regulation, which is very important. And also, I think it's very important that we understand what it is. We accept that it's unacceptable, and we feel ourselves empowered with this idea. Even if we feel even if we can do something and complain or not, at least we know that I'm in the right place. What the other person did is wrong. I think it's a very important starting point. And in this context, all of them, it's a long-term wish, but I think we need a societal change and cultural change, structural change, which is actually in the Istanbul Convention. EU is also a part, and also most of the EU countries. There is a need and legal provision that the structural change should be made in the future, and also actually EU directive, anti-war directive is also, as I said in my presentation, following the footsteps of the Istanbul Convention, is also wishing to reach and societal change in the sense awareness raising, trainings, and also educations in the schools, in the elementary schools, and the colleges, or these kind of things which we will have impact in 10 years is also very important, in my opinion.
No, and I definitely agree. I think it's really, really important to raise the aspect of education, not just in workplaces, but really going down to education in schools and in the family and so on. Because we have about 7 more minutes, and I see a really interesting question in the chat that I maybe will turn into a bit of a broader question. So the question is, what are the attitudes towards cyber harassment, and what are the ways to prevent it or block it? But maybe we can even expand that a little bit and talk about this more recent, let's say it's not new, but it's I guess probably increasing in recent times because of the pandemic, but also digitalization in general. So can you tell us a bit more about that? I mean, what have been the major issues that have been cropping up? What are the attitudes? Is it taken seriously? How difficult is it to prevent it? What are the kinds of measures that are put in place? And maybe to that, I want to come back to something I said at the beginning, which is, we are seeing major transformations in the world of work. I mean, not just in the world of work, but also in the world of work. So this is linked to the digital transition, but we also have the green transition. We also have, on top of that, we've got these major crises, including the climate crises, but also, as I mentioned, war increasingly, and economic crisis. So if you had any thoughts, maybe just to wrap up, about some of these challenges that are linked to current transformations and bigger trends. So the floor is to whoever wants to start first. Jane.
I think somebody unmuted me as I muted myself accidentally. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think, we're in the midst of these poly crises, and they all have an impact on rising levels of gender-based violence and harassment. And I think climate change is a particularly pertinent one. I don't really want to say anything about that at the moment, but, we do know that climate crises do lead to heightened levels of gender-based violence and harassment, and we need strategies around that. But I just wanted to maybe just to say something in relation to digitalization and, in sectors where women predominate, if you take, say, cleaning, domestic work, kind of care work, we're seeing an increasing number of those jobs being in the gig economy, platform work jobs. And the problem that we're seeing is that they're not linked into occupational safety health protections. There's no protection around abusive working conditions, long hours, and so on. And I think that's a really significant concern around those sectors where psychosocial risks are particularly high, things like job isolation, working at night, and so on. Significant psychosocial risks are increasing in relation to the gig economy. And I think we need to be looking at strategies around that, around organising women. Just in relation to cyber harassment and digital sexual abuse, I think, we have to have multifaceted strategies. around the use of cyber harassment and digital sexual abuse in the workplace. That means when people use workplace, tools like computers, tablets, telephones, there need to be significantly increased sanctions for those workers who use digital sexual abuse to abuse partners, ex-partners, colleagues, and so on. So I think we need to have higher kind of accountability for perpetrators of cyber harassment, but we also need to know how to help women protect themselves where there are repeated digital forms of sexual abuse, how to, help women remove content that digitalized, sexualized content, how to protect themselves, how to also save examples of digital sexual abuse so they could be used for evidence where perpetrators need to be prosecuted and so on. But I think this requires better partnerships with the big social media companies who are reducing their levels of protection around abusive content, and that is extremely worrying. And we also need to make sure that that's built into strategies around AI so that AI isn't used as a tool for further perpetrating unhealthy gender norms and violence against women through AI-enabled platforms as well.
Thank you very much, Jane. That's really, really, really important. Paula and Sharon, do you want to pick up on any of that?
Yeah, sure. I think what Jane said last, I think it's important. We have been talking about the negative impacts of digitalization on the women and the gender-based violence and harassment. This is sad, that what we know, but it's also, we can also use the AI. This can also have an opportunity as a mitigation tool. And this, I think, should be the way to go with it, because there is no way turning back. AI is there, digitalization is there, so it is important to use for ourselves and to make it possible for everyone to use it. And I think this is also an important topic. On this context, cyber harassment, there was something in Denmark, again, this non-consensual sharing of the intimate material or something. They are trying to give copyright rights of our face to the people. So if you would share anything in online without your consent, they will have at least a copyright. And we know that money is an important issue, even if maybe not criminalized, there's another way. So we can be creative and find something, new ways. There are new challenges, so we have to be creative and find new solutions. And on this sense, it's important that the women can organize, especially working women in trade unions, in the women committees, or generally in trade unions, because we are empowered when we are together. So we cannot fight with these problems with ourselves. That would be more.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paula.
Yes, no, I think in this regard, we need to make like a real effort in updating the information we have. And also, because this is kind of new, but it's not that new. Perhaps AI and the consequences and the use is like really, really new, something that is taking us a little bit the breath, like it's so fast, it's moving so fast but I don't know, during COVID, we saw that, there were lots of women that were sexually harassed, cyber sexually harassed. So we should incorporate this. I mean, in the topic that I was talking about, of course, in trade union education and courses on the topic, but we really need to spread the information about how to deal with these situations in order to have a clear role. How can we work to avoid these situations?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paula. Many thanks to the three of you for your presentations, for answering the questions. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so there's no more time to answer questions. I just want to mention one remaining post in the Q&A, which was Alicia Connolly, who mentions the tragic killing of Amber Check, who was a welder in the US who lost her life simply by going to work in a male-dominated trade. her story, Alicia says, is a stark reminder of the risks that women can face at work. So what we've tried to do today is outline, sort of highlight, again, restate this enormous challenge, and talk about some of the actions that are needed to promote, or to address and to eliminate this very, very pervasive problem. So thanks again to the speakers. Thank you for all the listeners and for all the questions. This is the end of the first panel, so that's a goodbye from me. And so I would like to thank also my colleagues, Mary and Crystal, and the interpreters, and our colleague Wouter, who was also involved throughout the preparation of this event. So many thanks to all of you. We will have a 5-minute break, after which we will move on to the second panel, which will be chaired by our General Director, Andy Watt, and hear from EU policymakers and trade unionists. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Dear colleagues, welcome to this second session of the webinar on gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work. If you missed the first introduction given by my colleague Kalina, just a reminder that this is taking place on the United Nations International Day of Eliminating Violence Against Women and Girls, and is the starting point is a working paper that you can find on the ETUI website. My name is Andrew Watt. I'm the General Director here at the ETUI. Many of you will have seen a program where my colleague Bart van Herke, the head of research at the ETUI, was to chair this session. I apologize, as it were, for not being Bart van Herke. So Bart unfortunately was taken ill this week and has had to drop out. So I'm happy to fill in for him on this very important topic, and I'm also looking forward to that, particularly because I will certainly learn a lot from this event myself. Again, just a reminder that the presentations and the discussions will be in English. You have the option, though, at the bottom right, at least on my computer, it's under the More button on Zoom. In any case, whatever version you have, you should be able to find an interpretation button, which will give you some options, German, Italian and French, to listen in those languages. So let me, without further ado, move on. This second panel is, as is a bit traditional in the Brussels bubble, with a focus on policy issues. So we're going to translate, if you like, a little bit of what was said in the first panel from the more academic side into policy actions and recommendations, and also demands. And we have 3 panelists here. So I'd like to welcome, first of all, Isabel Sherman, Deputy General Secretary of the ETUC, who leads the ETUC agenda on gender equality. Welcome, Isabel. Also happy to welcome Adele Philitians. So again, on the program, you may have seen, hello, Adele, you're very welcome. Standing in for Mary Collins, who is the General Secretary of the European Women's Lobby. Unfortunately, Mary has also fallen ill, it seems, at short notice. So Adele, you're very welcome to filling in for her, and thank you for doing that. And finally, from the European Commission, Ana Carla Pereira, the Director of Equality and Non-Discrimination at the Directorate General for Justice and Consumers there. Anna, you're also, of course, very welcome here. So we will have a round of short statements by the 3 panelists. I will prod them a little bit with some questions, and then we'll maybe have a second, more forward-looking round. And I encourage you to write your questions in the chat under the Q&A button here in Zoom, and I will then put these questions to the panelists. So, Isabel, may I start with you and ask you then for a trade union perspective? Maybe you could explain why it's such an important issue for the trade unions, what unions are doing at present to combat domestic violence and violence at work, and how you see the current state of EU policy. And then in the second round, we'll go maybe a little bit to the future perspectives.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thanks for the invitation today and for organizing this event. Very important indeed on this International Day for the Eliminations of Violence Against Women. If you don't mind, I would like to start with a very, very short video that Maria will put on, 1 minute video that we did on Sunday. Indeed, joining the Belgian trade unions in the manifestations we had, mobilizations we had on Sunday. That would be lovely, just to show the good spirit and the very energizing ladies and that we had on board, and in particular for us to be very present. As you mentioned, it is clear that there is a workplace dimension, and that is where the trade union has to be very active and very proactive to protect the women.
International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, trade unions around Europe stand united. And today the ETUC is with our Belgian colleagues on the streets to say clearly, violence against women must end.
Les commentaires sexistes, du harcèlement, de l'intimidation, de la dépendance économique, violences forment un continuum. Elles mettent non seulement notre sécurité en danger, elles nous piègent dans la précarité et entraînent de graves conséquences économiques.
En we moeten op alle fronten werken, want extreemrechtse krachten vallen het verdrag van Istanbul aan. Een van de sterkste instrumenten die we hebben om vrouwen tegen geweld te beschermen.
Nous ne les laisserons pas nous faire reculer.
Geweld op vrouwen moet stoppen.
Work should be a place of safety, dignity and respect, and employers must do their part. Zero tolerance for violence and harassment online or offline.
Thank you so much. So that was the spirit of Sunday. That's the spirit of today, much more than ever. And I think exactly because to fight against violence against women at the workplace is a real key issue. I just want to give us some numbers, because I think it's always important just to have a bit of an image of the reality. So from a 2024 Gender Equality Index, we have the figures that 1 in 3 women in the European Union have experienced sexual harassment at the workplace. We also know from our own research at the ETUI that the violence against women and third-party violence against women, particular frontline workers in health sector, in transport sector, in public sector, and hospitality, is rising. And this is, of course, linked to labor shortages in certain sectors where women are overrepresented. And we also have, not with COVID, but certainly after the COVID crisis, we have a rise of cyber violence, and in particular targeting women. Here we have also from the UNESCO study numbers that 73% of women journalists have faced online violence linked to their work. Just to give you a flavor that, of course, we cannot just say that violence against women is for the domestic spheres, or what we usually hear. It's very much something that we need to tackle. In particular, since COVID, we know that the workplace might or has been the home place, in particular due to telework, but of course for other forms of workplace. And this is where we clearly need to have this domestic violence addressed also from the side of trade unions. What we also see, and this is the very last worrying development we've seen in some of the member states, and in particular in Latvia, is that some member states are retrieving from a convention, here the Istanbul Convention, so they are not willing to be bound anymore by their international obligations to fight against violence against women. And this is something which is unacceptable, and this is, of course, where we have to be very mobilized today more than ever, but every day of the week, of the week, of the month, of the year, all the time, being very much on the side of women. We are very much on board with ETUC, and I'm sure we will be able to put in the chat, and I ask my colleague Aline Bruser, who is the Gender Equality Advisor of ETUC, working very hard with me to make things concrete and happen in that sphere, to put there in the chat. So very much a document that we've been issuing for make sure that we empower the women and we give them some ammunition to be safe at home, at work and online. And of course, to make also sure that we have the necessary support from the whole executive committee of the ETUC, what we did last week with the resolutions, in particular, targeting the issue of the workplace violence, and of course, to make sure that we are on board, not only, of course, only on that element, but specifically also on that element. What we would like also very much to mention in that circumstance is that for us, we need to be very equipped, and we need to see that women should be protected and empowered to be able to face, should there be the case, violence at the workplace with strong element, with support, with solidarity. And this is where, of course, we have to be able to negotiate at the level of the businesses, at the level of the plant, of the undertakings, as well as the level of the branch, and at the national level, collective agreement that includes all what we need for the women to be on board and to be protected. And there is a lot of dimension that the workplace can provide indeed to help those women. We also need to, and this is one of the key demands that we have at the ETUC, we need to revise a 2007 European Framework Agreement that has been negotiated back in time and adopted by the employers and the trade union associations on the issue of harassment and violence at the workplace, to include a very specific gender dimension here, and to make sure that, of course, all the new form of gender-based violence are included in terms of course, recognizing them, but in that respect, fighting against them. We need also to have an intersectional approach, recognizing the specific risk faced by workers, for example, migrant women, but also women with disability or racialized women, for example, but not only, of course. We need also to recognize that there is a form of economic violence that we are seeing increasing, in particular when it comes to the working conditions. And we could discuss, and I'm sure that Anna Kala will mention that, the issue of gender pay transparency, the fight that we see, or the resistance of business and employers not to be willing to comply with the gender pay transparency, where we understand that it's, of course, here a key obligation for them to close the gender pay gap, is something that we cannot accept. And of course, here we do see that this is one of the root cause of economic violence, on the top of forced part-time work, in terms also of not having good working conditions. This is also the reasons why we're looking for quality jobs, and in particular for women, and in sectors where women are very much represented, and of course that the wages and the working conditions are not degraded. So that's very important. We need also to have training on those issues, and to make sure that indeed violence is not happening, and everyone understands what does that mean. We need to be present, we need to be equipped, we need also to be very much active in terms of daring more democracy at the workplace, and of course making sure that the workers' voice is heard, that the workers' representative can be very much active, and that we are supporting those women and protecting them via collective agreement. And I will close with that element. We need to have data. We need to have data on the state of play. We need to have data on the the violence happening at the workplace, and we clearly need to have those data, because we need to know what is happening, and we need to be able to understand whether we should do more and what should be done. And here, in that respect, the issue of reporting, which is very much in the forefront in terms of, and I'm quoting employers, is administrative burden and is costly. No, reporting is not administrative burden, and reporting is far from being costly. It's an investment in the way business are complying and with their obligations. And clearly here, this is the data that not only business should need to report on, but that is very necessary for the trade unions, for the Labour Inspectorate, and for any kind of protections that we need to put in place to prevent the violence against women at the workplace. And this is something that need investment and cannot be targeted as a cost. And this is where I will end. And of course, much looking into empowering the gender equality roadmap of the European Commission to make sure that the gender equality strategy will deliver on concrete, legally binding measures concerning, in particular, that point. Back over to you, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Isabel, for that very clear statement of what the trade unions generally and the ETUC specifically are doing in this area and demanding in this area. Particularly note here from the Institute side your call for data and the requirement that data doesn't just come from out of the blue, right? It comes from reporting, in this case from surveys of employers and companies and their reporting, and of course that's something we very much support here from the ETUI side. So maybe thanks very much, Isabel. Maybe I can move on to Adele, please. Maybe you can give us your assessment of the reasons for why gender-based violence is so widespread and the main challenges you see in overcoming it. What do you think of the current state of EU legislation, directives on violence at work and domestic violence? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for inviting the European Women's Lobby and for the very insightful conference today on the International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and also for the organizer for the last minute change. I'll be replacing Mary Collins, our Secretary General. My name is Adele. I am one of the policy officers at the European Women's Lobby, which is the largest network of women's rights organizations across Europe. And I'm very happy that you're addressing the elephant in the room, and that we are talking about sexual harassment, which is real violence, and it's disproportionately affecting women. So I don't know, I think it's very important to ask how many of you have actually received sexual jokes, comments, unwanted touching when you're a girl, or also inappropriate text, emails, sexual advances. This is not the kind of things that are happening to men. It's the kind of things that are happening to the women. And as my previous colleague said before, statistics have shown that 1 in 3 women in the EU have experienced sexual harassment at work. And I agree also to say that the online space is actually an extension of the working space today, and it's also a channel that makes it easier and faster to foster this kind of violence. And finally, and as it is often the case, it disproportionately affects women in marginalized communities, such as the LGBTQ plus woman worker, but also the woman with a migrant statute, the woman with disabilities, or the woman of colors. So today what we need is a cultural change to dismantle this normalized this normalization of harassment at the workplace, and to promote dignity. And at EWL, we deeply believe that this is all rooted in a patriarchal kind of society that we're living in, where men have these superiority over women, and where unequal power relation is something that it's normalized in the workplace, and where there is also a systematic barrier to silence survivor. One of the ways to tackle this was the European Directive on Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. It is a historic step forward, as it is the first EU legislation that is addressing violence against women. That is also the first EU legal framework that covers the cyber violence crime, including Article 7 on cyber harassment. And it also takes a victim-centered kind of approach. So there are some very interesting step where we can move forward with this directive. However, there are still some stuff that we would like to demand in EWL in this directive, particularly is to explicitly include the violence in the workplace. I think that's something that is not covered properly in the directive. We also want to have, as I said before, this cultural change to dismantle the normalization of harassment to promote dignity at work, to have these intersectional policies to recognize the overlapping vulnerabilities of the disability or women in color or etc. We want safe reporting mechanism as well for all victims. And we want this to avoid also, like we want special training to avoid second victimization. And then in addition to that, in addition to the EU directive itself, I think it's very urgent to address gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace to be recognized as human rights violation and a threat to equality. Implementing the ILO Convention 190 is also something that is essential. At EWL, we want to end, in this regard, we want to end sexist stereotype. We want to protect employees' dignity and mental health as well. And we want to break the silence around the abuse. We also support equal pay and in order to ensure that women's have economic empowerment. And we also want to have a special focus on aging women as they can suffer from workplace discrimination. And we support the EU accession to the ILO Domestic Worker Convention to protect labor's rights in the care sector. So what we are currently working on today is the campaign and making it visible to everybody through the 16 days of activism campaign that sexual harassment is a form of violence. And we would like to actually, in the 16-day, what we did is we followed the directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence. And the 4 last day will be including the missing offenses in our view, which one of them being the sexual harassment part. So we have like a full day where we will be focusing on that. I think that another point where we could work on is the collaboration between the different laws, like of the employer, also the trade unions, the states, and to gather like a collective inputs all together and collaborate more all together. This is something that we really want to do, especially with the trade unions. And regarding the future gender equality strategy, with the current backlash on the women's organization today, I think that, and since the Commission is there today, we are strongly calling for a very strong equality strategy. I think that's as my colleague also said before, the implementation of the EU Pay Transparency Directive, but as well as the EU Directive on Combating Violence Against Women are essential for this strategy, and we hope that it will be included. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much to you, Adele, particularly as you've joined us at such short notice and given such a clear statement on behalf of your organization. Thanks very, very much for that. And I'm sure we'll come back to some of the points you've made in just a moment. But first, I'd like to get the perspective from the European Commission. Anna Kalner, you're very welcome. Please explain to us. Now, I guess you're monitoring also the implementation of the directive and seeing how it's being received in the member states. So what is your own assessment of the potential of the directive in addressing gender-based violence, particularly regarding the workplaces, because of course it's a broader directive now, but a big focus of our interest is of course here the workplaces. And does it need to be complemented then, in your view, by other EU initiatives? And where do you see the main challenges going forward? Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you very much to ETUI for the invitation. It's a day not only to discuss this topic, but also to reflect to what happens to all the women are victims of violence. And so thank you for giving us this space for a conversation, which is very much appreciated. Before I go into the merits or limits of the directive on violence against women, let me say a few words in reaction to what I already heard. The first is about data that you said yourself, Andrew, because we do collect data on gender-based violence at EU level. This is EIGE, the European Institute for Gender Equality, who's doing this work with us, now together with Eurostat. And next year, there will be a new wave of data that is coming for our knowledge. Now, this data collection is much broader than sexual harassment or sexual violence at the workplace, but it also includes that element. And what we know from the current figures is, and one of the figures has already been mentioned, is that 1 in 3 women in the EU have experienced sexual harassment at work, and 18% of these have experienced multiple times. So that I think, so it means 1 in 5 of those that experience it have experienced repeatedly, and 7% of this happens online. So it is not uncommon, but we should always remind that on-site physical violence still prevails. It's not just the cyber violence, which is very important and growing, but the physical violence does exist. We also know that young women are even more affected by this phenomena. So the figures go to around 40% of women aged between 18 and 29 as being victims of sexual harassment at work. And when you look at the charts at national level, then there are very big disparities. And in fact, surprisingly or not, in case you already know these figures, the prevalence of sexual harassment at work is quite higher in the Nordic countries, where gender equality is quite strong, than in some other countries. So it's quite interesting to see how sometimes gender equality policies do not necessarily solve by themselves this issue. Now, I think it was Isabel who mentioned that, of course, a fundamental and at the root of the issue is, of course, the lack of economic empowerment of women, and the economic disadvantage that they suffer in their careers and at the workplace. And so if there is no economic empowerment at the root of all this, it will take a long time to address this phenomena. And of course, in that context, there is a gender equality recast directive that has 20 years, and there is the most recent, the Pay Transparency Directive, who are two important key instruments, legal instruments, to support women at the workplace. And the Commission continues to work committedly on supporting member states in transposing the Pay Transparency Directive. As we know, the deadline for transposition is soon reaching the member states. Of course, I think aside the directive and on the background, it's very important to remind ourselves that the EU as a region has also acceded to the Istanbul Convention for matters that relate to criminal law and judicial cooperation. What does it mean? It means that a country, a EU country who is not part of the EU Convention or is thinking of retrieving, as it was mentioned, will still be bound by EU Istanbul Convention obligations through the EU. And this brings me to the directive, because the directive is one of the main instruments at EU level to observe the Istanbul Convention principles. So the directive is, as it was already mentioned, a very important novelty in our legal system, because it is the first EU instrument that addresses violence against women and domestic violence. Of course, we are currently supporting the member states in the transposition, preparing the transposition of this directive. Now, specifically regarding sexual harassment at the workplace, there are three things the directive does. First, it asks the member states to ensure that there are counseling services both for victims and employers, including information on how to remove the offender from the workplace. There is a second element that is about preventive measures to address sexual harassment at work in relevant national policies. And then there is a third requirement that relates to training taken by supervisory functions on how to recognize, prevent, and address sexual harassment. Now, the working paper ETUI produced says, well, all those requirements are important, but they are only applicable in the countries where sexual harassment and sexual violence at the workplace is already a criminal offense. So they say the territorial scope is defined by where this is already a crime at the national level. This is, of course, a legitimate criticism to the directive, because de facto it is like this. But I think it is important to understand that from a criminal law perspective, it is not possible for the EU to legislate in areas where its competence from, I mean, where we cannot increase our power of regulation. So it really falls to the national definitions. I do understand this is short of the objectives and of the desires, and I would, in any case, say that aside this directive, of course, we have the Gender Equality Recast Directive, who already obliges member states to prohibit sexual harassment in the context of work. Maybe this directive, which is from 2006, is not sufficiently used, and here is an issue really of enforcement and how we can enact more strongly this provision. There is, of course, a strong call to member states to ratify the ILO Convention 190, as it has already been mentioned. And I would say if 1 out of 3 women in the EU have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace, we cannot say this is a symptom of job quality, of quality jobs. So as you are aware, as our president has announced, there will be a consultation on the job qualities roadmap to the social partners, with a consultation on specifically on a future Job Qualities Act. And I think it would be quite interesting to see how the social partners react to that and whether sexual harassment is considered part of harassment and a psychosocial risk as it is framed in the OSH general framework. I think it will be quite interesting for us in the Commission to see exactly what will be the reaction for that. And here I link with what Isabel has mentioned on the role of social partners, because indeed there is a framework agreement of 2007. I think it would be important to look critically at that, with whether it's fit for purpose. And when it comes to our very, very current activities, we are looking into cyber violence specifically. Today, the Commissioner Labib had a meeting with platforms, online platforms, to discuss potential cooperation in the area of addressing gender-based cyber violence. The directive, as Adele mentioned, the Directive of Combating Violence Against Women, already has strong references, strong provisions regarding to cyber violence, but it does not ask the online platforms to behave as actors in the process. And so this is a very important missing piece that needs to be addressed. And this is the reason why this conversation with the online platforms is ongoing. But I'm happy to discuss this point further during the discussion. So I leave it at that. Let's try to condense it as much as I could, but hopefully with some teasers for a good conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks very much, Anna, also for your being indeed very concise and well structured. So my sense is here is a great opportunity. We have a social partner, the trade unions involved, a civil society organization, and the Commission. And I'm tempted now in a somewhat briefer second round to get you to interact now. I mean, freely, I guess, but maybe I could pick up the ball, if you like, that Anna just threw. I think in the direction of the employers as well, but they're not on the panel. But here, the engagement of the social partners. So here specifically the trade unions in the job quality roadmap. So Isabel, maybe I could encourage you to say something about that. I mean, and maybe to Adele, how do you see the interaction between civil society organizations like yourselves and the trade unions? Is there any sort of cooperation that you see there, or a need for cooperation? Maybe if we could get you to speak, and then we'll go back to Anna Carla. Isabel, please.
Thank you so much, Andy, and thank you, Adele and Anna Carla, for your input. Indeed, much appreciated for, of course, the cooperations, the long-standing cooperations, but of course to look forward what's next and how constructive this work has to be for moving ahead for women. So it's not just a one-off kind of situation, it's not just one directive that will make it all, unfortunately, I must say. And this is the reasons why we have to mainstream the gender dimension throughout all the legally binding instrument that we have. We can't wait. We can't clearly not wait until a review clause. And if I recall correctly, this review clause is for 2032 to weather check whether, we need to have more measures to prevent violence and harassment in the workplace. No, we have to act now. And this is all the more important because what we see coming is austerity measures again. Everywhere, when you look at the national level kind of political developments, is cut, cut, cut. And what does that mean for the women? That means clearly lower job quality, the infrastructure, in particular the public services will be targeted and very much in terms of where already some of the sectors are very much at stake. So here I would very much plea for not just thinking we do it once and that's for good. No, I do think that will not work, and this is the reasons why the ETUI has been very much transparent and clear about what we want to do. And one of the elements I mentioned is, of course, the issue of gender pay transparency. It's clearly not okay. It's clearly not okay that democratically adopted directive, I can't just but repeat that, is not accepted. So it's clearly rediscussing the rule of law is not accepted by one side of industry. And clearly he has said we were not going to do it because it's too complicated and too burdensome, where the cost is for the women who will not be able to to have an equal pay for an equal job of equal value, and will carry that to her retirement time up to 30% difference. So that's where the cost is, not the cost on the businesses, clearly not. When we already know that there are so many software that do the job for the businesses, so it's a one-off cost, so to say, to get this software. But after that, don't tell me that is the cost for businesses. So it's one element. As you very much pointed it out, Anna Kala, there is other instruments in the pipeline. I mentioned myself the 2007 agreement, where we also have here from the ETUC Congress 2023 the mandate to update this agreement and to request and to move it to a level of a directive. That's exactly what we are currently discussing with the employers, where we understand there is no interest whatsoever for a directive. So clearly here, without any kind of evaluations of what has the 2007 agreement be able to impact or not the workplace, where we know that of course there is a real need for work from both sides to make it happen. We clearly see here that there is a need not only to adopt this agreement, and I mentioned the different elements where we need to have this agreement updated, but we need to have a level playing field for all. We here cannot rely on the national and sector level to do it or not. And here, I think we clearly see that there is quite a lot of reluctance to indeed, after an agreement has been negotiated, to transpose it in a way that is really proactive. You mentioned another element where it has not been discussed so far, but you mentioned it in terms of the OSH, so the health and safety at the workplace, and you mentioned the social risks and well-being at work, a directive, of course, that should integrate certainly a part of the gender dimension mainstreaming. And here, for us, what would be very important to see is the protections of women, in particular when it comes to reproductive rights. And here I do think that we do see that women are exposed at the workplace to, for example, toxic substances, and in particular the innovative businesses that are looking for creating batteries and all of that. We do see that there is here a high risk, and that some of the businesses are not in compliance with the protections that should be provided at the workplace when it comes to exposure to toxic substances. And of course, here we do need to see a gender mainstream dimension. The other request of the ETUC in terms of the Job Quality Act that we hope to see coming via the job quality roadmap is, of course, that we clearly need to have a directive on tackling artificial intelligence and algorithmic management at the workplace. Why? Exactly because the AI Act does not, although recognizing the workplace as a high risk, does not provide any means for us to be able to tackle that situation of recognition of a high risk, but not being able to proactively prevent that high risk to happen. So what is clearly here, the demand of the ETUC, is that we have a directive on AI in the workplace to prevent discriminations, in particular against women when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence and algorithmic management, being by hiring and firing, being also on the dimension of the use of data and the monitoring of it in terms of undue surveillance here, to empower the workers, in particular the women, to be able to have the profit of these innovations and not only the disadvantages of it. So that's another element that we want to have in place. And I think in terms of, and I will stop with that, Andy, I think in terms of OSH, of health and safety at the workplace, occupational health and safety, OSH, in short, is of course that we clearly need to have a gender responsive risk assessment, which is based on the obligations, of course, for employers to comply, but also to prevent violence and to make sure that we get the data. So back to a discussion I just have in terms of setting or paving the way for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, where I'm just struggling to make a business understand that we need to have the data. We need to have the data, in particular when it comes about gender. We need to have this breakdown, and we definitely need not to be along the line of we don't do it. It's too complicated, it's too costly, that's not even acceptable in terms of a full respect for dignity at the workplace and the protections for the women at the workplace. We are not just second-class workers on the labor market, nor in society. And this is something that has to be very clear. So my plea really is that, in particular on the gender pay transparency, that the commissions come publicly and say, stop bashing the gender pay transparency, transpose it ambitiously and make it happen also at the workplace. I think this is what we need to hear from you, to stop the employers touring member states and touring any business to say it's too complicated, it's too costly, we don't do it.
Thanks so much for that very clear statement and an appeal vis-a-vis the Commission that I'll pass on in a second to Anna Carla. Before I do that, I'll give the floor to Adele. And just as a reminder, I would very much like to have an open discussion and your questions from the virtual floor. So do please write them in the chat. And once this second round is finished, then I will try and pick out a few of the questions that you posed. But first of all, I'll give you the floor to Adele.
Yeah, so to answer the way that we could collaborate with the trade union, like as a women's network, I think that there is, first of all, like the education and prevention. So as I said before, like changing the culture to really lead towards a safer environment at work for women. For that, we could use like role model as well, where they should have equal pay, thrive as well, like with economic empowerment. All of this needs to be like seen as normal. So from the education side, from the prevention side as well, to avoid any form of discrimination. I think that it's very clear today that the person that are being silenced online, particularly are journalists as well as activists or public figure in general, like in politician, etc. And it's just going against what we want. We want role models. We want young girls to be inspired by that. And I think that's a way of collaborating that could be like very easy with trade unions. It would be like the prevention and education through campaigns as well as through public campaigns mainly. I think that what Isabel said before about the AI Act, it's actually something that we are really eager to have as well. So to have like a risk assessment focusing on the for the platforms and everything, to focus on the fundamental values. We want also like to have like women's rights included within all of these platforms and providers to include this in their way of working, like in the services that they provide, but also in their own algorithm and that kind of things. I think that data collection is also a way where we could collaborate. And I think that I would be very eager to see like some of their recommendation. I don't know if you answer to the gender equality strategy, but I would be like very happy to come in and have like a gender perspective in that. Like I think that the lobby would be very interested in that. And we have like also some trade union organization within our organization that are like members. And this is like something that we will collaborate in the future. We haven't started just yet, but this is the plan to really focus on sexual harassment in the future. I hope that this answers the question.
Thanks so much, Adele. So I'll give the floor to Anna in a second. Do please put your questions to the panelists as a whole in the chat. So Anna, I'm sure you're used to, as a senior commission official, to be sort of coming under pressure from all sides. So you've had some challenges put down for you now from the trade union side and from the civil society side. If that weren't complicated enough, you you mentioned the online platforms, and I can't resist sort of putting my oar in here a little bit as well. I mean, that of course means we know the online platforms are overwhelmingly US dominated companies, right? So that I guess puts this whole issue we're discussing now very much in this wider political football game, if you like, or chess game involving the US administration, the whole trade policy issues, the regulation of digital services, but also then defense and things like this. So I don't know if you're at liberty to discuss those sort of issues, but that would be also very, very interesting. But please do feel free to take up what points the other colleagues have made. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, let me first comment on the clause review that is in the directive on combating violence against women, which Isabel mentioned. So it is true that the directive envisages an assessment by the Commission on whether EU-level measures are necessary to tackle sexual harassment and violence at the workplace by 2032. And I would say, looking at the numbers of the increases on violence against women in general, so we can only transpose that also to the workplace. I don't think it is possible to just sit and wait to 2032 to think about this, obviously. But it is true that when it comes to criminal law, in a way to make sure that violence at the workplace is a criminal offense, there are limitations in that are there due to the treaty, and these are, unless the treaty is revised, these are not going to go away, not even by 2032. So it is important to look at other mechanisms, and so this is where the acquis on equality, and that's why I mentioned the Gender Equality Recast Directive of 2016, come into play, and this is why labor law also comes into play. And it has to be a combination of all these things. So I do hear the sentiment that the directive did not deliver on absolutely everything that was expected. But we are certainly convinced that it delivers there where the treaty allowed us to deliver. And so it's, I think, through this type of dialogues that we need to work to think together on what else, what other mechanisms. So when it comes to the gender acquis, I think it is important to look back at the Gender Equality Recast Directive, because it has already quite some strong language, because it does prohibit sexual harassment and asks the member states to adequately sanction it. Are the sanctions in place? Are they proportionate and dissuasive? This is something that would merit probably an investigation. And of course, then there's labor law. And the reason why I mention OSH, and I hear that ETUI saying that, okay, there are other aspects of OSH to be considered, but the reason I mention OSH is because violence and harassment at the workplace are already part of the framework. So if we are to gender mainstream, it could be interesting to look for different forms of harassment and what that means. And then we can certainly discuss about sexual harassment. I think this is something that is worth investigating. I'm not certain that everyone would want to take that path, but I do see this as an area to explore when we are talking about legal work in the coming months and in the immediate future. To come to your point or question on cyber violence. So what our directive does is asks the member states to sanction and to provide prevention measures and protection to victims. What it doesn't do, because it's a directive, is not a regulation, is a clear message to platforms. And this is where then the entire body of EU law related to the Digital Services Act is very important. Because in that context, we do not have a specific reference to gender-based violence in the DSA, but there is this notion in the DSA that it is necessary to address systemic risks. And the Commission considers that gender-based violence is a systemic risk. And for that, we would like to engage with online platforms to have a code of conduct, which then could potentially be part of the DSA legal framework. Now, as you rightly put it, there is, for the time being, very little appetite from the major platforms to engage in binding codes of conduct. We are aware on their requests to have less rules, let's put it this way. In fact, some of the moderation policies, for example, of Meta, were changed this year as a result of political changes in the United States. And so this trickles down also to the gender equality angle, obviously. So the context is not very conducive. Having said that, they still have accepted to engage in a dialogue with Commissioner Labib and Commissioner Virkkunen for a conversation with academics, with victims of violence. And so we are hopeful that this will be the beginning of a more substantial talk and cooperation. Will it lead us to a code of conduct under the DSA? It's difficult to predict right now, and it might take its time. But we are certainly committed to do this work because, as we know, on the online work, I mean, there are the states, there are the regulatory powers, but the online platforms have a life of their own almost. And so if they are not active participants in this discussion, it's very difficult to combat the phenomena. We know that member states, the national level, will have a hard time because platforms are international. So there is clearly an international dimension to it. And it's not with one national set of regulations that we are going to address the problem, because this has no territorial borders in a way. So we are committed to look into this. But as you said, I mean, the context is a difficult one, and it has become more difficult since January this year, with the executive orders of the Trump administration calling on avoiding diversity and inclusion policies at the workplace, etc., etc. So.
Thanks very much for that. So yeah, at this point, if we were having a physical meeting, I would sort of say, well, the floor is open for discussion. We're going to do that a little bit differently now, thanks to the colleagues who've already put their questions in the chat, and I do encourage you to continue doing so. What I'm going to do now is sort of try and paraphrase some questions that have come up and pitch them a little bit towards our three speakers. So again, thanks. I won't mention you now by name, but thank you for your points. So there was a specific question, and of course, Isabel, I'm going to have to throw this in your lap here now about the trade unions' own responsibility, right? So trade unions' responsibility within their own organizations to tackle harassment and even violence. So maybe you could say a word on that, maybe indeed more generally about what the trade unions themselves as organizations can do rather than the demands of the ETUC, maybe also in the collective bargaining environment. A number of colleagues picked up on Anna Carla's point about the Nordic countries and the finding that the reporting of gender-based violence is actually higher in countries with a well-established reputation for gender equality policies, and the supposition that was voiced by a number of people in the chat is that this is due to a sort of high, greater consciousness of these issues on that in those countries. So maybe I could generalize that question a little bit. I guess maybe pitch this towards Adele, but to all of you, how you see the differences across Europe. I mean, is there something also we can learn from this? In addition to that specific point about the Nordic countries, is there a case here for sort of learning, mutual learning on a sort of benchmarking type approach to improving the situation across Europe? I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. And then there was a specific remark that took up a little bit this intersectionality point that a number of you raised. And if I understood the question correctly, it is whether you see harassment and violence against women as something distinct from that against, for example, trans people or gay men, lesbian women. Is this something you see as something specific, or is this essentially a sort of common problem? This was a question raised in the chat, which I'm happy to pass on to you. So Isabel, maybe we just keep with the same order.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy, and thank you, colleagues, for these very important questions. So, are we looking into ourselves what to do? And here, I'm very happy to mention that the ETUC has taken very important decisions and apply it on a daily basis. We have a charter to prevent harassment at the workplace and violence at the workplace. This is a charter that we have put everywhere in the working space we have, so to remind us to what it's all about. And I have even myself a sticker, and a lot of colleagues have stickers on their laptop, on the access card we have to get into, on the meeting rooms we have. So here we do look into ourselves how best to inform, and of course to prevent to prevent violence at the workplace on the top of training sessions. What we have also been doing, and I'm happy if you can see that, and I'm sure the colleagues have, I'm not sure you can see it, is the guide You can see it. Not sure my camera is working very well. It's a guide that I'm sure has been put on the chat. It's a guide we've been doing with our project Safe at Work, Safe at Home and Online, a guide for trade unions to eliminate violence and harassment against women in the world of work. So we give example of collective agreements and the work of workers' representative on how best to address the situations, to identify and to get ammunition for workers' representative and trade in the workplace. And we'll just give some examples, and then I will, I think, and with that on the top of course, bringing very much in as a priority since a long while democracy at work, and that we should dare more democracy at work in terms of being more proactive on requesting and being on the top of the agenda of negotiations between employers and trade unions at the workplace, but at the sector and at the national level, the issue of how best to prevent and to tackle the issue of violence at the workplace, and not just put it aside like, you know, domestic violence has nothing to do with the workplace. Indeed, it has, and to make sure that we're all on board with that. So we've been negotiating collective agreements, just to give you a bit of nitty-gritty thing on what can be negotiated. Indeed, we have collective agreement that have been negotiated on pay leave for survivors of domestic violence. Collective agreement on safe workplace relocations, on anti-harassment procedures, on third-party violence protections, on psychosocial risk assessment, and on digital safety and cyber violence policy. So all of that is something that you can find in our guide, and I'm happy to post it again. Can I ask the colleagues to do so, to post it again, this very important guide that we've been issuing with our project, exactly to equip our colleagues at any level to be well equipped and to be very active to prevent violence at the workplace against women. Back to you, Andy.
Thanks so much, Isabel. Adele?
Sorry, I was muted. I think that we do see difference regarding of the region of Europe that we are working in, and I think that's something that is necessary, and that I was actually trying to say before, is that we need like an harmonization of the definition of sexual harassment. This is what we believe is a missing offense from the directive. And that in the future review, we would like to actually for it to be like added, because the fact that we don't have like that this is not like a defined as a missing as offenses in the directive leads also to the fact that there is no that the national law on sexual harassment will prevail, and it can be different from a little bit like every national member states in the EU. So I think that's the main problem here, if I understood properly the question. And then regarding the problem on the side of the LGBTQ plus community, I think that it is even more marginalized, because I don't consider women to be marginalized necessarily. We represent half of the population. And I think that this is even going further already, as they are like even more discriminated because they're a marginalized group. So I think that was the two questions for me.
Thanks very much, Adele. I give the floor to Annika. Just a quick reminder, it's basically your last chance now to raise a question. We could have one more quick round before we have to close the meeting, so don't miss that opportunity. Please, Annika.
Yes, I think there were comments about this, the different national statistics, and the Nordic countries. And some of the comments are, well, maybe this is because people are more aware of sexual harassment at the workplace and what it means in the Nordic countries, and they feel more comfortable to report it. It is part of the explanation why these figures are different, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the Nordic countries are sexual harassment free, or are because there is in fact also a difference between the policy and the practice, and so it is not this difference in the statistics is not totally explained by this phenomena of more awareness. In fact, the researchers call it the Nordic paradox. So I think there is material there because it also shows that, as I said earlier, in societies where there are strong gender equality structures, the phenomena of sexual harassment still prevails, so still exists, and so it's worth discussing in the different contexts. Now, does it merit exchange of experiences? I think it does. In fact, we have a network of prevention related to violence against women, and this network is really devoted to exchange of experiences and conversations between the member states. It is not solely dedicated to the workplace, true, but the conversation can also be about the workplace, and I think it is important also to focus on this particular aspect. And then finally, a point on who is victim of sexual harassment at the workplace. You know, the statistics that EIGE produces also give us some figures about sexual harassment towards men at the workplace. So the figures were collected in 11 member states. And it is clear that while it's not zero, the percentage of men who are victims of sexual harassment is much lower than women. So this is clearly a gender equality issue beyond a working conditions issue. It is really a phenomenon that affects primarily women. Trans women, and I would say also in this case trans men, are particular victims of all sorts of harassment, sexual, psychological. In fact, they are probably the persons that are victims of all sorts of violence, the most hate speech. I mean, the numbers are very, very dramatic. Most trans persons, men or women, then actually have suicidal thoughts because of the violence they suffer from their environment, whether at the workplace or not. So certainly this is a group that is particularly affected by violence at the workplace, if ever they are employees, because very often they are not even recruited because of their gender identity and sexual orientation.
Oh, thanks so much, Anna Carla. So we're going to have a closing round now, I think. So I ask you to be, well, we don't have to be very, very brief, but maybe try to be concise. But I'd like you to now all three of you to maybe look a little bit into the future and tell me how you see this field developing. So I come more from the economic policy side, of course, there, and on the labor market, employment issues, you know, looking very much at digitalization trends, AI, of course. How do you see these issues of gender-based violence developing in a positive direction or in a negative direction, maybe? Are we seeing a shift? There's a comment about psychosocial risks. Are we seeing, or do you foresee a shift, let's say, from more physical violence to psychosocial violence or more psychological forms of violence, for example. Do you think that AI and digitalization offer opportunities maybe to better monitor forms of violence, or do you think this is, maybe because it can guarantee anonymity, is this actually a potential danger, a potential risk for increasing forms of violence? As some examples of some, let's say, more future-oriented themes, I give looking at the clock, maybe 3-4 minutes to each of you, maybe to take that slightly more future-oriented perspective. Are you more optimistic or more pessimistic? And to pick up any themes around that you'd like to focus on. Thanks very much.
Shall I start, Andy?
Please, Isabel. Yeah, I think we'll just. The Commission should always have the last word, right? So maybe we just stick to the the final to the lineup we've had so far. Yeah.
So the perspective, the good perspective for us is, of course, that we are very active, and that we are not satisfied with what we have, and we clearly need more for the protections of women. So we are very much working for a European Union that. Where women have a safe workplace, that women have economic independence, and that women are free from violence, and that we are creating and preserving the workplace as such for the women. We are very much on board in fueling and making sure that the gender equality strategy of the European Commission is something that we've been working on. We endorsed with conditionality the strategy, the roadmap, but of course the roadmap fueling the strategy. We are very much working with the Commission for more and better protections for women, because as I mentioned, we cannot just be satisfied with one instrument make it all. We are clearly asking for a directive on gender-based violence in the workplace. I think we need to identify it and clearly send a message to the employers, but also the society, that the workplace is a no place for violence, because it's exactly where it happens, in particular, and with the development of digitalizations, with the development of any kind of very intrusive, but also very kind of generative AI development that we need to control, and that we need to legally frame, so that this innovation delivers for all and not just for some out there. However, I must say that it's one element that we've not been discussing today, but I cannot but mention it, because I think this is the net big threat for women everywhere, is of course the rise of the far right. And if you, on the top of being a woman, you are a trade unionist, and you are very much engaged, and should you be, or should you have any intersectionality, then you are the target. And I think we have to be very well aware that we are facing one of the most important threats for women's rights, and everything which is along the line of, and I just quote because I think it said it all: we will protect you whether you want or you don't want. This is what Trump said in his after his second election. So this is something we cannot accept. We again are not and should not be dependent on anyone here, and certainly not on this kind of attitude and politics. And I think this is where we have to be very well aware and very well equipped, not to believe any kind of narrative from the far right. We protect you, because at the end of the day, and we've been demonstrating that for many issues related to the trade union demands, the far right says we will do it. When it comes to the vote in the European Parliament, for example, they vote against. So here we have to be very well equipped and raise awareness in the movement, in the trade union movement, but also in society, that this is not the way forward. This is no alternative. And we really have to be well aware that if far right is coming into power, that's going to be very difficult for any democratic group in society, and in particular the women, for any any of the rights and acquis that we have been fighting for and we have won, that's going to be very difficult just to maintain them. So rest assured that we are very much on board, and this is also one of the elements that we have been addressing at the ETUC Executive Committee and our resolutions on protecting women, and of course on the gender equality way forward up to the 2027 ETUC Congress, is of course to make sure that we are on board and we are stopping the way of the far right in that respect.
Thanks so much, Isabel, for that plea and recognition also the dangers coming from the far right in that regard. Very well taken. Adele, please.
Yes, so I think that today's context, as I said before, with the backlash, the rise of the far right, and can be like a little bit more tricky to work in, like especially at the European level, when you know that the third biggest group at the parliament is a far right group. So I think that is something that I want to highlight as well. Some of our organization at the grassroots level has also been facing some funding cuts as well as a lack of resources. And I think that we should not be silenced, that women's right is a human right, and we need to fight for feminist Europe. So this means to have safe opportunity, to have the same opportunity, to have the same economic power, to have empowerment, and to have the same right. And but also it also leads to have a feminist Europe, we need to have like a woman Europe that is free from violence, where women are able to make their own choice on their body, etc. And for that, it starts as well at the workplace. So I think that sexual harassment or sexual harassment on online space has, no matter what, the same repercussion, the same consequences as they touch on the mental health. They has like emotional and psychological harm to the women. And today we need a safe environment for all, like it doesn't matter the gender. And the EWL also endorsed the roadmap. So as I previously say, I really wish to see like a strong equality gender strategy that takes into consideration the sexual harassment at the workplace.
Thanks so much, Adele. Thank you. Anna Carla, please. The Commission traditionally has the last word in Brussels, so please make your statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, on your question, how things will evolve, of course, we can't totally predict, but the signals are quite worrying because the levels of violence are increasing, violence against women. And this is very much emboldened by the political climate, where you have politicians, leaders clearly having no shame in now saying things about women's bodies and women participation, things that I think 3 years ago would be unacceptable, but somehow in the space of 2 years, this has all been flipped. There is a much more misogynist discourse propelled by social media, with a strong influence on the younger generations. So we also see much more prevalence of violence in young, for example, in young couples. I'm taking now the general issue of violence, but I think these are just predictors of what can then happen at the workplace. Because if our youngsters think that they can beat their girlfriend just because, what does this mean when they will be in the workplace, when they will become workers? So I think that the signals are not promising, and so that is one of the reasons why it is really important to rally forces. Everyone who believes in gender equality and believes in a gender equal society, that needs to rally forces. And that is the reason why the roadmap for women's rights was presented, was really to have a coalition of the willing, that gives us a bit of strength to address some of the political difficulties that are in this area. Now, we will present our strategy, our gender equality strategy, in March. And I think, although I cannot disclose much at this point, maybe I can give just a few elements for consideration. The first is, of course, that within the obligations of the Directive on Violence Against Women, there is a request for member states to provide national plans on how they will combat violence. And I think this can give us a very good platform for discussion with the member states to see where can we do better collectively. So I think that's can be used. If we use this successfully, I think it can be quite important as a complement to the legal acquis. The second point, of course, is that we have just submitted the EU report to Grevio on Istanbul Convention. We have submitted this week. Our deadline was the 28th of November. And now, of course, what happens is that we will have a process of visits and analysis of this report, and then we will have recommendations by Grevio, which is the body who provides input in relation to the Istanbul Convention. And the Commission is certainly committed to use those recommendations as leverage, political leverage for progress. I think that's quite important. And the third point I wanted to mention, and because we are also running out of time, but I think it's important, is money. We have a discussion ongoing on the multi-annual financial framework for 2028-2034. The Commission proposes to ensure that throughout the EU budget there is gender equality principle. This is actually being sort of contested or challenged already in the Parliament. So we'll see how this goes. But obviously, among one of the intentions is by promoting investment, by promoting policies that are supportive to gender equality. We also hope to address some root elements that are at the basis of the issue of violence. I mentioned economic empowerment, and I think that investment of women, participation of women in the labor market, making sure they have access to different industries where, for example, growth is happening more, where our research is gender sensitive, where our health policies are gender sensitive. All this contributes in a way to prevent violence, because again, violence is possible because there is a sense that the offender has the legitimacy and the power to attack the victim. But if we work on the economic structures and make sure that there is more truly gender equality, this power is less perceived and so is vanished. So I think it's also important to have an agenda that is strongly rooted on investment in gender equality policies for us to combat violence in the broader scale. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Anna Carla. Thank you, Adele. Thank you, Isabel. It's been a great pleasure to host this event. And I'd like to thank Kalina Maria, Paula, other colleagues from the ETUI who helped to organize it. Thank you, the speakers. Thank you also to the interpreters for supporting us today, and to you in the virtual audience for listening, and also for your questions. So it was very important for us to have this event on this quite special day for this topic. So I'm glad we did that. Of course, there's always a drawback from a sort of virtual format, that we don't get a sense of community and of the people involved and interested in the discussion. What I can't tell you exactly how many people participated in the end. What I can tell you is that about 400 people were registered for this event. So we've really had a very considerable interest in the event. So I guess that if I can use Ana Carla's words, that's a small contribution that we've made now to rallying the forces of people interested in this topic and keen. I'm sure that's the case of all the people in the audience, keen to promote the ideals and the values that have been expressed here, rejecting violence and promoting equality. It's certainly been a learning experience for me. Also, I've learned a lot from this debate. It's been interesting to see how starting from a question of violence, if you like, a fairly specific question. We've gone into AI, we've gone into pay, we've gone into collective bargaining, we've gone into even Trump's policies and stuff. So it's really shows how a single subject now is linked with lots of other very interesting debates that are also going on in the European sphere. So let me not miss the opportunity also to make a plug for the Institute. We have the publications you've seen now on gender violence, a number of other publications we have related to gender equality issues. You've seen the publications that Isabel and her colleagues have posted in the chat from the ETUC, but the ETUI also has a very extensive range of publications on a number of other topics that I think will interest you, related all to the world of work in very different ways. And I encourage you to visit our website to look at those. So thanks very much. Thanks to all of you involved. It's been a great discussion, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.